I'm pleased to welcome on today Terry Wolfe, author, researcher, public intellectual. He's embarked on a monumental work entitled The Paradox of Fundamentalism, the first volume of which is called God's Fault. Thanks for coming on, Terry.
Thank you for having me.
So,
Yeah,
go.
I was just going to say before I wasn't expecting you to plug the God's Fault book. That is my latest project, and it's before that I was doing works on rabbit holes, which I think is something that we both have in common. We both find interesting. So, Fire in the Rabbit Hole is the one I published before that. And before that was one called Maybe Everyone is Wrong. And that one is a big study of the book of Revelation. So we can go in any direction you want, but if you want to talk about God's fault and the paradox of fundamentalism, I'd be happy to.
Yeah, well, I was watching you discuss it with Hervoje Moric, and he does a great podcast, Geopolitics and Empire. And sometimes you're on TNT radio with him,
Right.
and you
Yep.
always give a good interview. But what I liked about your work is, yeah, like so part of your work is religion, and then the other part of your work is, like you said, like rabbit hole kind of UFOs. And I saw one of your things on Aleister Crowley and Lamb and all that kind of stuff. And so I I made the observation as I was like watching this. I said during an interview of my own, Penny Kelly, an author, she was talking about how for 1500 years the church ruled society, and then for 500 years it was the nation state, and now we're going into like a transition into like corporatocracy and technocracy. And so you'll see the institutions of the previous civilization kind of getting sublimated. So, for instance, Mussolini, he said that fascism was a religion, was more properly understood as a religion. And you think about it, all the 20th century isms, whether it's fascism or communism or veganism, wokeism, it doesn't matter. These are sublimated religions because that were religions back in the earlier time period when Christianity was rolling, and then you take that away, and then people will sublimate. Another one of those religions is kind of the UFO phenomenon. You'll see it as a sublimated kind of
Yeah.
attempt to express spirituality. So I wondered if you could comment on that.
I find that Rene Girard's analysis on that is one of the most interesting. I haven't read even his entire book on the subject, but he talks about how the decline of Christianity sort of brings naturally this sort of goal to replace it, which you can see with Nietzsche and these different thinkers that are like they see the Catholic Church basically declining and they panic and they're like, well, that was sort of the organizing force of polite society and this kinds of things, even with the Protestant Reformation. And he was talking about how they're going to have to sacrifice Christianity to new. Rene Girard was talking about how it's basically going to have to serve as a scapegoat for all of the problems that come after. So it's not just that Christianity is being replaced, it's that it has to be blamed for everything that happens when you aren't a Christian anymore. You don't have Christian society. He obviously does a much better job explaining it, but yeah, these different isms are powerful. They capture the imagination and but they leave people wanting. And so they sort of develop into a not just an ideology, but a way of life, and then from the way of life to sort of this organizing force. And I mean, obviously they don't admit that they're religions, but like you said, you can look at them that way. Uh, the UFO thing in particular is obviously the most interesting insofar as just that it's controlled by the military, which is like, all the disclosure has to go through the Pentagon and these places that we would have no trust in, no faith in, except I see people all the time, right? Just today, I saw videos from people who I was on TikTok with because I that's basically where I gained notoriety was on TikTok, explaining the concepts in my book. Maybe everyone is wrong, explaining my interpretation of prophecy, which includes a discussion on UFOs and disclosure. And so I had these, peers, you could call them, that were also gaining popularity. We were all sort of talking about the same things. And we started to diverge, of course, eventually. And they started to go really into the side of indulging the UFO uh, uh, rhetoric and the disclosures and what it would mean. And this has all these huge implications for theology. And by now, they're basically fully in the cult saying everything that the government's telling us is true. And then, you know, we have to adjust our beliefs according to what people that we think are liars are telling us about something that we have no experience with and no contact with. There's this sort of this weird blind faith in people who are experts at psychological warfare. It's like, how does that work? So, like, I find it interesting. I think it's important to stay on top of the talking points. But yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with what my stances are on this, but it's like I'm not the slightest bit worried about UFOs or aliens or demons even or any of the supposed, apocalyptic things that are revolving around that topic. And I'm always trying to calm down the Christians who are running around thinking that, this is the end of our faith because there's some, news that came out of the Pentagon and some congressional hearing is going to change, the what was written 2,000 years ago in the Bible. It's like that to me shows a very weak faith. It shows a lack of critical thinking, and that is sort of what I feel like we are in right now. And Carl Teichrieb, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He doesn't definitely doesn't publicize himself much, but he is an extremely good researcher. Carl Teichrieb calls this the age of reenchantment, and he says that the future, the danger that we're looking at, is not a materialistic, atheistic, communistic sort of system of abandoning all religion, but a reenchantment of the world, a delve back into a neo-paganistic, um, very superstitious new dark age where people will have their own pantheons and mysticism, shamanism, druidism, these types of things will come back. And once you start looking for it, you start paying attention to that. You can actually see it a lot of places. The flat earth, I see you have a globe behind you. I'm sure you get flack for that. Nowadays, just saying the earth is round means that you're controlled opposition to, you know, I don't know how many people. I'm scared to try to put a
The
number on it,
marketers projection people, they come after me like a mafia.
but this is where we're at. It's like Fire in the Rabbit Hole was written in reaction to me being on TikTok and I had 220,000-ish followers when I got banned with no explanation and just deplatformed off of there. But in that time, I was being inundated with people who wanted my opinion on all of these different things, right? So you're sort of just getting a fire hose of topics that people care about, and they're like privately messaging me, and it's in the comments and everything. And I realized that people are holding on to a very thin thread of objectivity, and they really they haven't done any research. So with the one slight gust of propaganda, they blow into a whole different stream of thinking, and now they're going down a rabbit hole, so to speak, but they're not doing it out of curiosity because they are firmly grounded in something and they want to explore an idea. They're doing it because they have no idea where to go, and they're just so easily swayed by arguments and by vivid imagination. And as long as you present it as counterculture and you present it as a sexy alternative to the boring mainstream idea, they just sort of become caught up in, oh, this is what they're trying to hide from me. And because it's something they're trying to hide from me, it's not acknowledged, it's not official. It therefore must be valid. It must be, and I think that's a very clever trick that they've done, is to turn counterculture into the main way of brainwashing people by having these alternatives that are discredited at the same time they are discrediting the mainstream. So there's not any narrative that you're supposed to trust anymore in that sense. Like I don't think we're supposed to believe Fox News and CNN anymore. Like, I don't think they want us trusting schools, trusting government officials, and trusting mainstream media. They want us to go to Joe Rogan. They want us to go to Russell Brand. They want us to go to Jordan Peterson and these people who are the supposed alternative. And there they can say anything and they don't have to prove anything. It's much easier to sort of generate a grassroots interest in whatever project they're working on. And with the great transition that they're working on towards this, I mean, to just jump ahead to sort of the conclusion that I found is the new age, the age of Aquarius, this sort of Aquarian conspiracy to get rid of Christianity, get rid of tradition and traditional religion, and then bring us into this new age of enchantment where um, it's a post-truth world. Everyone has their own individual truths. And in that situation, like it is so easy to rule people and to drag them into crazy schemes, like post-human, transhumanist dystopia and hell, because you're not even sharing an objective world anymore. You don't sympathize with other people because they're not a fellow person you respect and you share some sort of coherent worldview with. You're all just floating entities in this, vast imagination, and pain isn't real and life isn't real, and we're all sort of floating in a dream. So what does it matter? It's like you can get to that point. People don't see it yet, but I believe that's where things are heading, and that's why I pour all this effort into trying to point it out as it's happening, and come and have discussions with people and analyze critically the alternative media just as much as we always have the mainstream media. And I think that's where that's one of the main points of Fire in the Rabbit Hole is that the the alternative we need people to be watching that just as critically as we look at the mainstream media and say, they've got something up their sleeve. We need to talk that way about the alternative as well.
Yeah, I have a theory. Back in the 90s, I remember when they created the phrase, the meme, urban legends. And all of a sudden, urban legends came that didn't exist before, and then all of a sudden there's all these shows and documentaries and Mythbusters and look, we're going to do urban legend. It just exploded as a thing. And only in retrospect and looking back did it occur to me that what was probably happening was a test, a beta test, where the people in power wanted to see how does propaganda work? How does it disseminate? And then they have to, so they'll create outlandish narratives because they have to be outlandish so that
Mm,
they can track them properly. Kind of like when you put ink in cells, so you can see blue ink and you can see which cells are traveling or whatever. And like when I was a kid, they had very famous kind of urban legends of Richard Gere and a gerbil. We'll leave it there. Or what was the other one? Rod Stewart going to a hospital having his stomach pumped. We'll leave it there. And so the more colorful they are, the more that they can track the dissemination, and then they can see, hey, we put it here, and then it went over here. We put it here, and they would create influence maps so that when they had actual propaganda that they really wanted to use, they knew what places to hit. Like, say, for instance, when a certain health crisis that we will not name um, was disseminated, they initially did it through 4chan, and they had these videos of people falling over, and
right.
I immediately questioned that because I was like, that country is a closed off country, and one of the staples of
Yes.
propaganda is keeping you away from the direct source so that you're only looking through the lens of the propagandist, right? And you can't fact check it. And so I immediately knew, I was like, wait, how could this be getting out from a lockdown totalitarian regime? And I was right. I mean, it was all fake. It was all stage managed, but they used 4chan as a dissemination platform, or Joe Rogan
Hmm.
as a dissemination, flat Earth, so that they can track it. And then when something that actually matters to them, like say, for instance, a global financial problem with bonds or something, they know exactly who to hit. They know exactly what influencers to call upon to get, but the colorful Bigfoot style, being abducted by a UFO and being taken to Lanulos with the Galactic Council, like those are kind of like the test subjects so that they can just map do an influence map. So
I think that's a great point that we have seen that. I did notice that 4chan is and has been and continues to be a source of psyops and getting this ball rolling from somewhere, and then the next thing you know, there's fact checks happening on places that I don't know if they actually believed anyone was going to trust fact checkers, but um, I think that the whole pushback industry is there to validate their psyops. So they create a psyop, then they have reliable mouthpieces that everyone hates speak against it. And that then makes people think, well, as long as this person hates this idea, it must have something true to it. They like it. So that's the level where there needs to be kayfabe. There needs to be that level of both sides hyping up the other one's, um, talking points. And yes, there are a lot of people who still just sort of passively, non-confrontationally accept what they're told from the mainstream as well. You can't pretend that's not the case, but it's getting very strained. And so yeah, even something like let's say somebody like Alex Jones, he'll come out, say something, and then if there's a significant pushback from other places, that's when that talking point actually explodes. It's the counter reaction is fuel. It fuels the fire. It makes it more valid. And so I do
Interesting.
think they're working on that level of just ignoring somebody. Like Russell Brand got these accusations thrown against him. I don't know if that's going to lead to anything, but suddenly his name is being plastered everywhere. Whereas somebody like that Hervoy March that we know, um, big, you know, very influential. He has paved the way for many interesting conversations. He's been around for a long time. He deserves to be in that same realm of conversation, but he never gets any negative press or any positive press. They just quietly shut down his PayPal account. They just quietly, deplatform him from things, and he just gets sort of cut off from the conversation. Whereas the people, I think one of the hallmarks of controlled opposition by now is to have the backlash, but without any real consequences that stop you from saying what you want to say. And so even the war, the culture war, it's like Donald Trump too. He's indicted on something every week now, and it's just every time they do it, it's being tracked that his popularity numbers go up and up and up.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so
The Streisand effect, right?
exactly. So, to me, that is the interesting conversation to have is this meta level of the chess game happening, as opposed to just hyper fixating on one specific agenda. It's like sort of the rules that we're playing by are interesting to me. That's one of the things that I'm always watching for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of cybernetics, right? The study of cybernetics was kind of pioneered by a guy named Norbert Wiener back in the 30s and 40s. And so he was the first guy who is credited with conceptualizing systems, like systems theory and stuff, and how systems are controlled by positive and negative inputs, right? So you need at least two sides. You need and he conceptualized this with early computer programming back when they called them electronic brains. And there was a guy in the audience. He was giving a speech at the Macy conferences, and his name is Warren McCulloch. And Warren had done the first neural mapping of the human brain. And he was sitting in the audience. He was like, "Oh my goodness, this cybernetics concept of controlling things with positive and negative inputs makes sense because the brain operates like that with neurons. They have an on switch and an off switch, and they seem to operate. So they applied that to computers, and it became binary code with ones and zeros, right? So you have to be able to steer, kind of like walking a person, left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And so the system, the cybernetic system that we're in seems to have, oh, it's the conservatives on the right and it's the liberals on the left. And you're right, the way that they play them off of each other. so that one group's propaganda and the pushback becomes the propaganda for the other group, and it creates this echo effect that basically controls both sides. And anybody who was outside of the usefulness of that propaganda effect, like a Hervoya, Morich, or any of the kind of honest players, or they don't exist. They're just shunned because they're not useful for the cybernetic system. In fact, they're a threat to it. So they kind of push them to the margins. But more importantly, both you and he, I mean, you mentioned getting deplatformed from TikTok and probably other venues, but think of it this way as well. Whenever you want to crush out the pre-existing civilization, you stigmatize it. They're gods or demons. And I was talking to J.R. Nyquist, and he was discussing how when Christianity came in, Christianity spread through the cities, and that's why the bad people were the pagans, which in Latin paganos means rural person, rustic person, hick, hillbilly. And that became pagan, became bad because it was associated with them sticking to their old gods. They were still worshiping Zeus and Hera and Mercury and all these things. And so all of a sudden they're told their gods are demons, and the new civilizational kind of blueprint is emerging, radiating from the cities. And so Nyquist was saying that the same thing with like woke culture or whatever you want to call that is coming from the cities, and it has to stigmatize the people from the previous civilization, which in this case would be Christianity. So now the Christians are the people being canceled, being marginalized and told that they're bad people and judgmental and just evil, and you want to
Hmm.
control women's bodies and all this kind of stuff. But I don't know. I think that's why that plays into it as well as to why you and Hervoye are you're both Christian. So
Yeah, I would say that's it's an interesting point that the cities are the centers of obviously thought, and universities now are for a long time have been these pivot points where things can suddenly change, and then it does disseminate slower there. And then to have to demonize rural, um, even though it's traditional and it's being attacked as the dominant society, as if they're the underdogs. That's kind of the paradox, is that so like I find one of the most easy ways to sort of capture that idea is the way that the Democrats and most of liberal, the left-leaning people will act as if Ronald Reagan is still the president. They just Ronald Reagan is this eternal specter that they are fighting against. The family values, uh, you know, oppressive, saccharine version of Christianity that is so hypocritical and shallow, and but then this total obedience to corporate interests and the military, and it's like, okay, that he existed, he did his thing, but to them they need to keep that alive and act as if that's still the dominant culture, so that they can rail against it and push their more and more radical agendas. And then the Republicans, for what it's worth, and I'm Canadian, so I don't identify with any of these parties, but um, I am obviously, like anybody who's paying attention, you have to pay attention to what's going on in American politics. They also just every debate, somebody will bring up Ronald Reagan and say, like, yes, we still stand by the Reagan principles. So they have this kayfabe of both sides, agreeing where their identity is. And then what I find interesting about actual Christianity, as opposed to that sort of fake, politicized, Americanized, version of Christianity that's about the Constitution, and it's about, these systems of economic models and things like that that really has nothing to do with Christianity. Um,
you're seeing civilization two usurp civilization one. So all of a sudden Christianity and Americanism goes away, and now it becomes capitalism and corporatism, and that becomes the new, even on the right. I mean, they've abandoned Americanism for capitalism. They never make Americanist arguments. It's capital. Ben Shapiro, capitalism, capital, because they
True.
can't, if they did do Americanism or Christianity, well, Mr. Shapiro can't, but if they did, that would, kind of that would hark back to the civilization they're trying to erase. So even the
Mhm.
right is trying to erase those old things, and they're just switching it out with your right corporatism or something like that. And then the left is they'll do science in every leftist kind of debate. They'll say, okay, who believes in evolution? Raise your hand, and then the Republicans are anti-science. That too is replacing the old religion with the new one, which is science. Like Vilfredo Pareto, the Italian economist, talked about that in the 19th century, that the respect and admiration, the social prejudice in favor of religion from civilization one is now the scientist in a lab coat, coming out and telling you to,
But in
submit yourself to human medical experimentation. But he's in a lab coat, so we have to do it.
But in both cases, what's so interesting about it is that they have to redefine those things in the process. So capitalism, when people talk about it now, it has nothing to do with real capitalism. It is a captured system. It is regulated very specifically to favor certain monopolies, and it's an anti-competitive, controlled market that has you know you could see it during the lockdowns, the printing of trillions of dollars to give to the top 500 companies to keep their shareholders happy so that and then meanwhile everything else is non-essential. Like this is not capitalism in any sense of the word. This is some weird fascist marriage between state and private interests, and the banks are the ones, mediating and controlling everything.
It's very clearly mercantilism, the system from before capitalism. Mercantilism was globalism, right? What they're now calling globalism. Like, so in mercantilism, you don't make anything in your country. You just sail to other countries to get products. Then you sail back to your country, you sell it at a profit. And capitalism was actually disruptive to that. And they came out against capitalism. Like when factory production started and it started undermining the very wealthy mercantilist system, they actually dropped the hammer on capitalism. Like I was talking about this in a recent interview about the American Revolution. Part of the American Revolution was the Industrial Revolution happens in the Netherlands first, then it goes to England. They're getting fabulously wealthy. The Americans want to jump in on this. And they're like, why can't we make products here? And like for instance, they were noticing that, hey, if I have a pair of shoes made in my hometown, I can get them for $1. If I get them from London, it's $20. And they're like, well, can't we just produce them here? Why do we have to get them from London? And so the answer from England was no, 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 no. You're not going to make anything. You're going to buy the $20 shoes because I'm the middleman making $19 off of this. You're going to continue to buy this 20, and we will not allow you to produce anything. And they even, William Pitt, the prime minister in 1770, he said America will not be allowed to make so much as a horseshoe nail. And he passed the Navigation Acts, which were laws prohibiting any materials going to America that would allow them to build factories. So the
Wow.
mercantilist system actually came out against capitalism. And so all these Republicans are like globalism and interdependence and all this. That's that's not capitalism. You're talking about mercantilism. You're actually against capitalism. Capitalism is you making stuff here and now, oh, you're a protectionist. You're evil, evil
Yeah.
racist, bigot, protection, populist, and that's very stigmatized. So yeah, what they're calling capitalism is not capitalism.
And then on the other side, on the left, they've redefined science. So now science is not about questioning what everyone says and, having objective, measurable results. It's about technocracy. It's just the people who are labeled as experts can say anything they want, and even if it's demonstrably false, and there's counter voices that are instantly pointing out why that doesn't make sense. There's no debate and there's no, exploration. It's just trust the science, capital S science. And so they've turned that into a religion too. And so these both sides they are abandoning the old principles, and then their new principles are just, wearing the mask of the thing that they're saying that they are. Like and so I think they're much obviously closer than they like to pretend. You have there's all sorts of different ways you can label it, but it's more or less a neo-feudalist system that they want to create. And I think that's what Carol Quigley called it. He said that the Atlantic, joint powers of England and the Eastern elite of America want to create a neo-feudalist system through the banks over time. And so that you have on the one hand, and then like I would say like Bertrand Russell and H.G. Wells and these other influential thinkers from England have done a good job of sketching what that looks like. And they were sort of imagining this whole thing um, in the late 1800s and early 1900s already, that there needs to be this false dichotomy. And then it kind of needs to collapse into that world government, not as a dictator, just, what Christians fear is the Antichrist coming in, the world leader that is going to control everything, but just basically the formation of a new class of managers. Aldous Huxley called them the world managers, I believe, or the world controllers. And there's, these different science fiction authors essentially have had their own terms for it, but in real life, it is the World Economic Forum, it is these think tanks, it's these groups who are financially, and economically contributing nothing. They're just soaking up these resources. The investor class has so much money, they don't know, what to invest in except the destruction of any possible alternative, to themselves. And that's the only thing to invest in anymore, is to destroy counter narratives and to destroy the possibility of any new system. So, that's sort of the game I see happening, and that is the world government. It's not a new Hitler or the Antichrist coming in and having this charismatic adoration of everyone. I read the Bertrand Russell's book, The Scientific Outlook, and I know he gets a lot of praise. I saw it on TikTok as well. He's still this figurehead on the left, like you said, that it's all about science and trust the science, and Bertrand Russell's name gets thrown around all the time. In
Like
his
he's an
actual,
archbishop, of the new religion.
yeah, and in his books, I point out, like, what do you guys think of him saying that there needs to be a constant eugenics happening of he was talking about just straight up interbreeding races, and he was fully a racist. He believed that black people were inferior and that they could be bred to do hard labor, and that they would have a more passive they were more passive and could accept the rigors of the hard labor better, and that basically as long as the British were ruling and sort of making the eugenics decisions, that he could guide society into this more productive. And they're like, I don't believe that's not in his books. I would not believe that. And I'm like, I can give you the page number where it is, but he had uh, a whole chapter on what a scientific society would look like. And that's where
Scientific dictatorship. Yeah.
yeah, you would find this technocracy, neo-feudalist sort of hell outlined there already. And, I feel like Christianity is the one of the last roadblocks to sort of fully rolling this out. So, um, to me, obviously, that's why I find it so amusing, because Christianity being so quaint and ancient by this point and boring, and people think it's very, um, you know, irrelevant. It is at the same time this extremely radical, uh, controversial, like last defense against this monster that's pressing down on us that wants to take us out. And then the game is to how to shift it and cause it to slip and fall and to panic and to do things that it's not supposed to do. And a lot of that has to do with, in America, has to do with associations with, you know, the constitutional gun-toting, violent revolutionary nationalist sort of impulse on one hand, and then the other one, the hyper progressive, anything goes acceptance and tolerance and love. And there's, let the number one rule, the only rule in Christianity is to not judge, according to them, and that the game and the identity politics of Christianity is is red hot right now. And I was in the furnace in TikTok. It's like
Hmm.
you come out and you start talking about the Bible or Christianity, you're going to have you know, 17 different flavors of Christianity coming at you instead of uniting on certain principles. It's just a civil war of backstabbing and name calling, and people that initially were huge fans of my work and fascinated by the research I was doing ended up calling me a heretic and wanting to have nothing to do with me and telling their followers to abandon me as a false teacher and all these things like that, because this is sort of the game that's being played on that side. And just the other day, I was looking through the oldest emails I have. I think they're back from 2005 and 2006. And the correspondence I had with authors, with guys who were running their own websites, with a lot of influential people who were just sort of creating their own very basic Web 1.0 sort of websites and things like that, but their email was available. So I was just sort of going down memory lane of 2005, 2006. The conversations were so wonderful. There, people were so individualistic. There was this politeness and curiosity. People were just enjoyed the fact that you could reach out to somebody across the world that, you know, you might be interested in their work and ask them questions. You get full paragraph answers from each other, and people took the time to respond. And it was weird to look at it and be like, was this the real world? Were we ever at a point where, you know, the internet was uniting people? Nobody was being clumped into factions. There wasn't sort of this de facto,
Echo
red
chamber,
coat. Yeah.
silos.
And it really made me appreciate how much progress they have made to divide and conquer, to create the schizophrenic, paranoid, sense among even people who share 99% of things in common and have the same interests. We can now look at each other like fully alien, hostile beings that, you know, don't just have different opinions. We have different factual worldviews and can't agree on the basic principles of and the number one thing, the number one threat, I believe, is the green agenda and the anti-carbon, the carbon control system, where I saw an article just the other day on how human breathing was, becoming an increasing concern for scientists. The fact that we breathe and we create carbon dioxide. What are we going to do about this? This is a troubling question for scientists. Now it's okay, we get it. It's like you want to kill us. Depopulation is ultimately the agenda here. And that's one of those things where if you want to have a conversation with somebody, where do you even start if they've bought into these narratives, um,
Well,
where
understand it's a religion. Right. Like I said, it's
yeah,
a sublimated religion with the same Armageddon narrative, except now, like it's basically Catholicism with God removed, with Jesus removed, but you keep all the same structures. Like Catholicism, people say, oh, Catholic, the original Catholic with a small c means universal or global church, universal church. And so globalism like that, it's the religion. Like I was talking to somebody just in an interview the other day, and I was telling them about this gentleman at Harvard, and he was giving a talk at Harvard Law School, and he was telling them about like monotheism and the power that it conferred, because before monotheism, every different city state would have its own god, its own patron god or goddess. Athena is the goddess of Athens, or Venus is the goddess of Rome. Jehovah, look, Jerusalem, the title of Jerusalem is the name of a pre-existing god before Jehovah. And and so he was saying that every one of those gods had a jurisdiction within the city, But if
right.
you make the claim to, oh, I have the universal God, now you can use that as an excuse to breach other people's jurisdiction
Mm,
because you have this federalism. I outrank your local provincial God with my new God, and it's the
right.
same thing with the green agenda, where they're like, oh, well, we can't wait. It's just too pressing and important to wait for these national jurisdictions. We have this warrant to go and breach jurisdictions because because we have this new religion that allows us to supersede your sovereignty. And so it's very similar to religion. Like Tucker Carlson had this woman from England saying that she wasn't going to breed because the world was too scary to bring children in because of global warming. And so you see a new nun class of people, who don't want to breed for this religion. The way that they act, it's very so, and they're not susceptible at all to logic, reason, or science. Science, like for instance, a staple of science would be pattern recognition, systematic thought, like Thales of Miletus, the Greek philosopher, like 300 years before Socrates. He was the first guy to say, hey, maybe eclipses aren't happening because the gods are angry. Maybe there's astronomical bodies and we can calculate them using systems, and pattern recognition. And he was right. He was the first guy to do that. Primitive people think that the eclipses happen because of man's sinfulness, that it's caused by personality rather than a system, right? And,
Hmm.
and so Columbus manipulated that with the Native Americans. He said, hey, I can make the moon disappear because he knew an eclipse was coming. And once the eclipse came, they thought he was a god. They thought he personally did it. And you see that same rationale with global warming. Oh, it's not natural solar cycles. It's your sinfulness is causing this, and
Yeah,
it's the same kind of savage appeal to kind of, and that's a hallmark of like non-science, of pseudoscience.
absolutely. And I think, my stance on Rome and their adoption of Christianity with Constantine and the taking it on, very fascinating. I'm writing currently a book on Rome's history and how it fits in with I believe it fits in with the prophetic warnings in the Bible about the beast and the beast system. So I'm fleshing that out currently, but one of the things I do find so interesting about exactly what you said is the fact that before you had that monotheistic, superseding of all local jurisdictions, that was how they coexisted, was by, you know, it was like you have yours, I have mine, mine. There are limits to it, and once you place that God at the top and you say it's supreme over all the others, and then the Roman Empire itself, or the Roman Republic, was um, was about incorporating everyone else into a sort of a tolerance and coexistence, this diversity within the Roman Empire, and where they basically only cared about the legal and the financial. As long as you pay us your taxes, whatever, we'll leave your gods alone for the most part, kind of thing. But when they do put Christ or the Christian God up there, that is also a power play, a move to say, all must conform to us on that level of, full allegiance, abandoning of your previous identity, and that kind of thing. So it's this huge shift in thinking. And yes, once you replace Christ or Christianity even in that same system, which is ruthless, it has nothing to do with Christianity, it doesn't care in the slightest about actual Christian values, just like it never did. It was always about power. Then yes, the same type of logic follows where you must abandon the former things. This is now, you know, you're a heretic if you don't if you don't follow the rationale of the green priesthood, the green scientist class that is now, just dictating. One of my most viral video on my TikTok account before I got banned was about what they said were climate lockdowns. They said that it was in the middle of the actual pandemic lockdowns, but they said that the the next lockdown was going to be for the climate, and it was going to be much worse. It was going to ban all private vehicles, all fossil fuels, drilling everywhere in the world would have to stop. Red meat would be totally banned, and basically they'd have to reinvent capitalism and eliminate the free market, and that would be, the climate lockdown. And that got millions and millions of views and likes and shares and retweets, and I still see the clip circulating some places. Um, Alex Jones played the clip on InfoWars. Several different InfoWars hosts posted it, so it really went viral to the point where I feel like it actually shifted a little bit of the narrative. And then you haven't heard anything about climate lockdowns since then, but you are seeing those same policies being implemented right now under different names not as part of a cohesive named phenomenon called climate lockdowns, but you are seeing banning in individual countries. You're seeing legislation banning fossil fuel, you know, traditional cars. I think in Canada, 2035 is the point at which, they're not going to be allowed to produce um, more traditional cars. I think Australia and some other countries have already
No
passed
more
laws like,
autonomous vehicles because they want electric vehicles so that they can remotely shut them off. If you've got like, like a internal combustion engine, you can go
yes.
wherever you want, whenever you want. They want to be same thing with light bulbs. They banned traditional, luminescent light bulbs, Edison style light bulbs because they want LEDs because they can remotely shut them off. And they can't with the analog. So they're getting rid of all analog and even with cars, right? Just like they got rid of analog clocks, they got rid of, analog television.
Mhm.
Television was originally analog, and now everything is kind of going analog cars. Are getting rid of. Now we have electric cars and electric everything, so that they can remotely control it. I wanted to hit something as well, just regarding the Age of Aquarius. You mentioned at the very beginning of this conversation the
Yeah.
Age of Aquarius, and I wanted to this is a rabbit hole. We're going off
Yes, it is.
topic here. I'm going to put my safari hat on and we're going to go deep into the jungle of my dark subconscious. And one of the things I saw this remote viewer, and just for the audience, remote viewing, the military experimented with it. They were trying to replicate what the Soviets were calling their psychotronic program, and they didn't know if you could weaponize quote unquote psychics. So they did their own parallel program just to see if there was anything to it. They determined that there was after they found a downed plane in Uganda. And so they started funding it and studying it. And there's a remote viewing group, and there's a gentleman named Edward Reardon. And Reardon was talking about he was remote viewing and seeing the explosion of the star Betelgeuse. And after that happened, it opens, according to him, it opens a portal, and and he starts getting data from the god Enki, the ancient Sumerian god. And now this interested me because I previously was studying kind of, Enki in different ways. Like I read a book on crop circles, and one of the crop circles in binary code was warning about the return of Enki. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I was reading a book by Dolores Cannon, a goddess of the New Age movement, right? Founding mother of the New Age movement. And she would put people under hypnotic states and allegedly talk to their higher selves. And one of the things, some of the data that she was getting through, was somebody was explaining the true purpose of Stonehenge. And they said Stonehenge was not supposed to be visible. It's supposed to be buried under the earth. And she was like, well, why? And she said, because it's a communication system. As the earth spins, basically Stonehenge spins and all those dolmen-like structures, and it creates a spiral of energy, and you can use it as a communication system. And I found that very interesting because Göbekli Tepe was, discovered in Anatolia, and it was like 12,000 years old, and it was purposely buried. And they know it was purposely buried. And they were like, why was it purposely? Just like Stonehenge. And it's a
Mm.
circular structure of stones. And then I'm looking at CERN in Switzerland, right? Where they have this large circular structure that they buried under the earth. And they had all these like weird demonic, like kind of dancing rituals when they opened CERN, and its symbol
Yes,
looks
they
like a
did.
666. And there's all these rumors that they're talking to someone, and one of the rumors was that they were in contact with Enki, and that name just kept coming up again. Enki, Enki, Enki. Just for the audience again, he was the god of water in Sumeria, kind of like Poseidon. And his real name, Enki, it means it's a title, and it means Lord of the Earth. And Ki is the earth, but his real name was Ea. And this is where it gets interesting, is that Ea was also pronounced, like in the Chaldeans, they pronounced it Ea. And among the Canaanites, they pronounced it Yah, like Yahweh, right?
Mm.
Might be Enki, might be the same God. And if you look at the Old Testament, you look at all the water manipulation, like the great flood that kills everybody, or Moses getting water from a rock, or Moses parting the Red Sea, or Jesus
Yeah.
walking on water, all these water imagery symbols. And one of the things that was interesting in this rabbit hole was that Enki's symbol, he had a number that was associated with him, and it was 40. And if you look at the symbol 40 in Sumerian cuneiform, it looks like a fish. And so then you look at early Christianity
Mm,
with the fish symbol and all this kind of stuff. And I'm wondering if all of this return of Enki stuff is their new age version of kind of the coming global religion that they're already kind of like seeding, that they're planning. And I don't know, it's interesting. I was reading a book about colors, had nothing to do with religion or conspiracies or anything. It was about color. And the guy, when he's doing the color red, he talks about the Sumerian legend, the origin story. Like Adam. Adam's color was in Hebrew is thought to
red.
etymologically derived from red, from the
Yeah.
red clay. And he talks about Enki. He goes into the Sumerian legends of Enki creating humans as a slave race. That the original gods, there were the higher gods and then there were the lower gods, and the lower gods were complaining that they were being abused by the higher gods. And so Enki said, "Hey, I can make a slave race. We'll call them humans." And so it's just interesting, this concept of the return of
Mm,
Enki and us being turned back into a slave race with,
mm.
with his return. And the elites maybe are there to make sure that we're engineered to go back to our docile kind of slave race, like the eugenic programming. Who knows? I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out. Put the Enki narrative in your head to see if you can find something salvageable there.
That is fascinating. You've done more research on that than I have, and I have heard many people bring up the concerns about CERN and from the angle of quantum physics and the idea of trying to just on a metaphysical, like there's a spiritual level, but at some point science and religion merge. If you become advanced enough, basically ancient shamans were just advanced scientists who didn't have, electronics. They had drugs and whatever, and the human mind being possible to open up these things and that side of things. But the idea of Enki and the tying into um, almost prehistoric, religions that they would be trying to revive that. I think at that high enough level of uh, classified science, militarized science, there is a deep occult fascination. Obviously, Hitler, obviously, the, these different factions have tried to see what they can get out of it. I'm very skeptical about their ability to make real progress in those areas. I think they keep trying to uh, trying to weaponize it, trying to get to the point where they can really have some control system that is surpasses rational limits and that they can just start to brainwash people. Like they would love that, of course. Any totalitarian power would love to have a genie in a bottle or some sort of power that transcends, rational limits. But I've always looked at it from the skeptical point of view that uh, it will be fruitless, that they will not be able to manage it, and that their frustration with not being able to, even if they do something, if they create a spiritual phenomenon, they have some sort of oracles or they have some sort of insight that they create, that ultimately they'll be so frustrated by it and not being able to control it that their resort will just be depopulation and sort of going back to brute force tactics. Um, but so from my perspective on the Age of Aquarius, what I was seeing is there's a deep tie-in with Helena Blavatsky and theosophy, that whole strain of thought, the human potential movement, and supposedly empowering people while actually kind of enslaving them by having these new cult leaders come around and the requirement to uh, a prerequisite basically to abandon rational thinking and then have the imagination take over as the central force. And then within that, the connection I found to real organizations was Jim Channon, who is uh the man I think George Clooney played in The Men Who Stare at Goats. I think he was inspired by him. He was the captain or I don't remember what his rank was, but he was in the US military behind the that psychic
I stayed at the guy's house who you spent a week at his house, the guy who you're referring to, but go ahead.
I would love to hear that story. Um, so yeah, he wanted to have the first Earth Battalion, it was called, which would be basically the reinvention of the U.S. Army as a uh, psychically friendly, open, peacemaking force that would put uh, basically it would allow psychics to become ambassadors to go into hostile situations and mediate peace and do it in a way that creates the most powerful optics, because he correctly pointed out that in the future, real fighting forces are going to become less important than optics and then public perception. And so it'll be more important to have everyone like you and agree with you than to, uh, you know, control everything with brute force. And so this would sort of, it was tied in with that sort of psychological aspect. And then he broke down even the divisions of the military into what Delta Force would do, what, the Army Reserves would do. And I
Yeah.
think if you track his plan, you're actually seeing a lot of that being implemented, because the military, like he pointed out, does have this social reform effect, integrating blacks and whites together by forcing them into the same military squads and
Yeah,
forcing them to
beta
work.
testing. Also, yeah, with the vaccines and everything like that, it's beta testing for the wider culture. Yeah, exactly.
And
I wanted to, okay, finish that. I just wanted to make a real
so,
quick point.
yeah, I was just going to say that the Age of Aquarius is essentially this vision of the future as this giant alternative to the traditional way of doing things, and he was on board with that. There's the Esalen Institute and these different uh, groups that were Aldous Huxley and these big influential people who still they're echoing throughout counterculture today. Um, and then at that time that Jim Channon was doing those things, I believe it was Steve Pieczenik who was the Assistant Secretary of State, I believe he was. He was basically the right hand of Henry Kissinger, who actually got things done for Henry Kissinger when something needed to get done. And Steve Pieczenik um, is the basically the man behind Alex Jones, the guy who his number one contact, his source inside the Pentagon, who has all these contacts. And during the 2016 and 2020 elections, he was coming on to Alex Jones's show and making all these promises and having some very interesting conversations in public on this show about their history. And so you can sort of see this push within high levels of the military for the transformation of society. Steve Pieczenik talking about how the federal government and the Constitution need to basically go away, that they're outdated. There needs to be this devolution of power and the collapse of high level politics, so that basically all that would be left is the military and local governments. And so I've spent time trying to imagine what it looks like if they get what they want. This sort of communitarian breakdown of society where we go back to having these subsistence living agrarian lives, which Alex Jones and these people always romanticize about being off the grid and being
You mean
away from.
living in a commune, a sort of communism?
Yeah, exactly. Having this broken down, decentralized society where you can have a wife and kids, and you can just have a dogs and farm animals,
Yeah, the
and
Amish. Yeah, that's
it's
what they want. Yeah. So,
yeah.
so I mentioned that earlier, the Industrial Revolution, right? And so the reaction to that was the Luddite movement, right? Where they wanted
Mm.
the artisans who were getting displaced by the machines went and broke the machines. And so communism arose in that kind of milieu. And Robert Owen was an Englishman, and he, tried to do it in England. Then he comes to the United States and he sets up all these utopian communities. But yeah, but the Amish literally were from that. So when they talked about communism, they were talking about like the solution was going back to like, like a pre-industrial, Amish style living, and that's essentially what they're pitching now. So it's funny that it's being pitched from the right now,
Hmm.
this
Yeah.
communism,
It's
and
like a
let's
libertarianism, libertarianism being, reduce federal power and controls. And so what is the ultimate reduction in federal? Well, just there's no system at all. You just have, a little plot of land. There are no highways. There is no, tax system. You're just making it on your own, and you live and die by the strength of your family unit that can sort of survive out in the wilderness and do your own thing. And so in order for that to happen, sort of this pushing libertarianism to this extreme level, you have this breakdown into, and then that's why it's so important to set up. Um, Jim Channon had absolutely a wonderful way of envisioning this, where he was talking about the decline of an empire and how you have to plant the seeds for its revival ahead of time so that they can come to fruition and blossom as the collapse is happening. And that's what he said needed to happen, that you need to plant these seeds of the new age so that by the time the collapse happens, then it's ready to take over and it actually becomes a rebirth instead of a collapse. And that's what I think they've been doing with stuff like the X-Files and the sort of this counterculture of blending science fiction with the new age. I rewatched the X-Files after I was doing this research just to see,
Mhm.
what kind of messaging was in there. And I used to love the X-Files, one of my favorite shows ever. And now I'm like going back and I'm noticing there's all these messages
Yeah.
in there about the Native Americans having this inherent spiritual wisdom that transcends the scientific limits, and Scully's always, skeptical, but it turns out it's always true. The thing that they're investigating is always real, the spirits and the ghosts and the
Mhm.
mystical things. And so it's like this framing device to push this into the conspiracy theory world, that the ultimate conspiracy that they're trying to hide from us is druidism, it is shamanism, it is this, anything goes, and that the aliens are actually just custodians of the earth that are
Yeah.
concerned about
Always benign. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
they're concerned about our mismanagement of the earth's resources and things like that. So it's very subversive and interesting to go back and look at that again with fresh eyes and see that they're kind of just setting up that exact thing that Jim Channon. I actually almost wonder if Jim Channon, or his closest associates were like if Chris Carter or somebody who was involved in that show was like a friend of his, and
Mhm.
this was like an actual project to try to,
Like a psyop
yeah,
to
but
normalize, yeah, the new religion that's coming ironically from the right, in that
mhm.
sense, because the conspiracy world is more associated with the right, and so these religious elements are coming in. I will quibble with one of the things you said. You said that you feared that they would try to use non-rational means and science to control the population, to brainwash people. I kind of think I mentioned before we're living in a cybernetic system. I think that what they're doing, if you go back to Isaac Newton. When Isaac Newton first came up with the theory of gravitation, it was called pseudoscience. And why? Why was that? Because the people at the time in the Royal Society didn't believe fields existed, right? And they said a field, so you're saying, something that isn't physically there, that you can't see a color or a smell, that it's affecting something else. He's like, that's magic. Magic is influence at a distance. And so the same thing happened to Faraday in the 1850s and 60s. He was accused when he described an electromagnetic field. He was told that that was magic and pseudoscience, right? So the
Right,
concept of fields is so associated, and so now you're looking at them through HARP and through all these ways that they can manipulate cognition and mood and all these things. So it's essentially magic, except the new magic wand is like an aerial, it's an antenna, that has kind of things
right.
odorlessly, colorlessly emitting, and it's manipulating people. And I think I was watching this kind of report on this movie that was using subsonic frequencies. And it was manipulating the audience. It was making people physically ill. Like if you go below 19 hertz, you can trigger nausea or a sense of anxiety, panic,
Mm.
and people were being carried out in ambulances and stuff. And they revealed, hey, we weren't really good filmmakers. We just put this subsonic frequency in there and manipulated you. And all of a sudden, it occurred to me, what if you wanted people to hate a political figure? You wanted for whatever reason. And what if your cell phone was emitting a subsonic frequency that you weren't aware of. And every time you saw a picture of that particular figure that they wanted you to dislike, there was a 19, hertz signal
To
that you weren't.
associate it. Yeah.
Yeah, and all of a sudden you didn't know why, but every time I see him, I get nervous and I just don't like him. And then every time they want you to like something, they'll have a different frequency that stimulates you to feel calm or peaceful. And through these, so basically, like you made a reference earlier to Arthur C. Clarke's statement that any sufficiently advanced science is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
And I think we're at the period where this is essentially, by the old definition that the Royal Society is using, this is magic. They're manipulating the society with these fields, influence at a distance, and this is their new kind of control mechanism. And we're totally unaware that every time we look at a meme, it would be interesting, and I've not done this, but it would be interesting if somebody could create like a device, and I'm sure it exists, that can pick up, subsonic frequencies, and then to just go look through memes on the internet or look through commercials on TV. And I
Sure.
found out subsequently that your cell phone does in fact emit and has the capacity to do subsonic frequencies, and it communicates with your TV. And they said that their rationale for this was that it helps track commercials that you're watching, so that they can
Mm.
better market, know what commercials you're listening to. And I'm like, okay, so your TV and your cell phone have the capacity to transmit and receive subsonic frequencies. Interesting. So,
Absolutely. And I would, as soon as people talk about the subsonic frequencies and the electromagnetic radiation and these things, I always think of the New Age movement is obsessed with vibrations. They're obsessed with
yep.
harmonies and harmonics, and that if you have enough people on the same frequency at the same time, their consciousnesses will reverberate and create a resonance effect, and then that opens up portals and whatever it all manifests things. It's the religion is about frequencies, and so the next wave of these passionate because they're you don't find anyone more passionate today than the people who believe in frequencies. Like you can see it on if you're in the trenches of TikTok where these things are just sort of coming from out of nowhere, and you see people with no production value on their smartphone in a van somewhere, just being as genuine as possible, but they are just rabidly fascinated by the idea of frequencies and of exactly the things you're talking about. Or 5G was a huge topic a couple years ago, you know, and how devastating it is. They've defined almost everything by frequencies, and then you add into that, yes, this manipulation. They will then talk about quantum physics, which is the idea that the whole universe is vibration. And so then they conflate those two things with consciousness and then reality and physical reality, and that ultimately, since it's all vibration, that is why you can manifest things into existence by just thinking about them and controlling your own future
I'm
that way.
going to be interviewing a guy on Tuesday, and his book literally says that. He has a chapter about how quantum physics and he even says this explicitly, is the new religion. And he said the scientists are the new priests. So
Right.
it kind of plays exactly into what we've been talking about. But anyway, let's wrap that up here. And my last word to you is just if you do go down the rabbit hole of studying Enki and the Age of Aquarius, because Enki was the god of water, pouring out water, just like the Age of Aquarius zodiac symbol, pouring out water.
Right.
And
Yeah.
we're leaving the Piscean period, right,
Hmm.
which is Jesus and the fish, to this Age of Aquarius, which is kind of associated with Enki. So that's a weird thing. Anyway, but how can people find you now that you've been deplatformed and so heinously discriminated against?
I do have just a simple website if people want to find links to almost everything. It's wolfpox.com. That's been my online handle for a long time. WOLFPOX. I created way before, monkeypox and these other titles. Since I was a teenager, I was
Yeah, teenager. I saw that. Yeah, it's when you've
yeah,
had the wolf box.
yeah, it's not clever. It's just the title that I use. It was also my TikTok handle.
I would
Um,
suggest penicillin for that, by the way. But
And then you'll also find a link to my Substack, which, I'm probably this is the area where I'm the most active right now. It's winterchristian.substack.com. And, and so when I do new podcast episodes and things, I think it has an RSS feed. It gets fed into there. So wolfpox.com is sort of the one stop. place for all the links and my email address if people want to get in contact with me. I will look into the Enki thing. That sounds very interesting, and how it ties in. I don't think I've ever heard anyone else say that, the Enki New Age connection in the Age of Aquarius. So thank you for that.
Maybe they're terraforming the planet, getting rid of the carbon for Enki's return. But anyway, thank you, Terry Wolfe, for coming on, and hopefully we'll chat soon.
Thank you. I hope so.
I'd like to take a moment to thank you for watching. If you'd like to stay updated, hit the like and subscribe buttons, but more importantly, if you don't want to see me reduced to shelling my old merch, such as the Daniel Natal in action figure, where you can see Daniel engaging in an action as he watches TV, or engaging in an action as he surfs the internet, or failed products like the Daniel Natal Pez dispenser, or the even more ill-considered Daniel Natal urinal cake, think about supporting the show by buying one of my books. For instance, you can buy my book, Actionable Ethics. The link is in the description below.